First, though, we're going to be joined by Resources Minister Martin Ferguson, following the shake-up in the who's promising a shake-up in the regulation of Australia's oil and gas industry after the release of the draft response from the government into Australia's worst offshore oil disaster at the Montara oil field. The oil spill off the pristine Kimberley coast last year, you remember, went for 74 days before it was eventually capped and closed off. Well, the Resources Minister Martin Ferguson is in our Parliament House studio. Minister, good morning.
Good morning, Fran.
Minister, before we get to the Montara report, can I ask you first about the New Zealand Pike River coal mine tragedy? Will you order a review of coal mine safety in this country following this New Zealand tragedy?
I think historically we've had a very good record on mining. What we're currently working on is a national approach to, I suppose, a uniform set of health and safety rules with respect to the mining industry in Australia. But clearly we've got to have regard for any lessons out of the New Zealand mine accident. But in general terms, I remind you, about 10 or 12 years ago we had the Mauer incident in Queensland, by which we had to actually seal the mine. It effectively became the tomb. I think, you look back historically, when incidents such as this have occurred, we've always gone out of our way to learn any lessons, and similar to the Montara investigation. But we'll appropriately have regard for any inquiries and recommendations out of New Zealand.
How many underground coal mines like that do we have here in this country?
Well, firstly, I'd want to have a look at the facts with respect to the nature of the mine in New Zealand before I suggested that we've got any similar difficulties in Australia. But internationally, in terms of mine safety, Australia is at the leading edge, and so we should be. In relative terms, the number of deaths in the mining industry in Australia are very good compared to other international situations, such as, I might say, in China.
Minister, let's go to the Montara report now. You say that the Montara oil spill last year was preventable, but can you guarantee it won't happen again?
Oh, my job's to actually work on the basis of the report that I've been presented. There's no doubt Montara could have been avoided. There was fault with the regulatory regime in terms of them not doing their job on the ground, and also the company. But the report further strengthens my resolve to actually put in place a single national regulator. This is the third report I've now got that argues that is the appropriate way forward. I've got support from industry and all state and territory governments other than the Western Australian Government, and I'll be seeking to resume discussions with the West Australian Government about all of us fronting up to our responsibilities. This is not about state rights, this is about an industry that is going to grow in importance, jobs and export earnings. And the report clearly says that whilst our approach to regulation is appropriate, we fall down on implementation both at a company and a regulator's level.
So the regulatory regime as it stands is all right, but the Northern Territory Government was just too lax in implementing, is that it?
I think that's a fair assessment. The Northern Territory Designated Authority gets a caning in the report. On receipt of the report, I had discussions with the Northern Territory Chief Minister and the Minister. They accepted the criticism, and I have effectively put in place a process of change with respect to the culture of the organisation in the Northern Territory, and required them to recruit some new experts. But it's only an interim step. They've had to do independent assessments of the Montara field and look at other activities within their realm of responsibilities. But I have to move to a single national regulator. Industry wants it. I think it represents also a streamlined approach to regulatory reform in Australia, and it gives us the best chance of ensuring we've got the, I suppose, best practice regime for environmental and health and safety issues.
But you are going to have a fight on your hands there. You say we need a single new national regulator. You're committed to that for offshore oil and gas, but WA has already rejected the idea. It's a key state in this, isn't it?
Yes, but I think there's an opportunity to have further discussions. One of the issues to Western Australia is they want to be consulted on where we might bring offshore oil and gas opportunities onshore for the purposes of developing LNG plants, etc. I'm absolutely committed to that. The last thing a Commonwealth would do is seek to determine without proper consultation where gas hubs should be in Western Australia. But having said that, the health and safety of our workforce and the environment is of the utmost importance. And I simply say the Commonwealth will seek to have proper constructive discussions with the Western Australian Government on these matters.
Since the Montara leak last year, I think you've signed off on 120 new gas and oil exploration licences. Environment groups are very keen to see that the new regulator, this single national regulator you're talking about, doesn't also have responsibility for the issuing of licences. So, in other words, asking you to consider structural separation in a sense. Do you see that as important?
That's in my model. There will be structural separation. There will be a separate organisation. It's an extension of the current responsibilities of the National Offshore Petroleum Safety Authority to include environmental considerations, because if you have an accident, you not only risk lives, you also risk the environment. But I will put in place a separate agency with responsibility for title regulation.
The release of this report has sparked new calls for a moratorium on new offshore exploration licences until a national system of marine reserves have been established. We heard earlier on this from one of the environmental groups. Will you consider such a moratorium?
No, I actually think we've had a good history. In 25 years, we've drilled 3,000 wells. We've had one accident. We cannot afford to close down an industry that is vitally important to our own energy security, and in doing so to put out of work thousands of workers. Our responsibility is to attend to energy security, but in the context of having the best possible regulatory regime in place that is not only accepted by industry but also adhered to, and to ensure that the policeman responsible for the implementation of those regulations is actually doing the job.
But no one's talking about closing down an industry. But given that's started this interview, as you said, can't guarantee, another oil spill won't happen again. Isn't it imperative that we do get some combination of marine reserves and exploration areas?
The issue of the marine reserve is currently being considered.
It's going pretty slowly, though. We've been considering it for 15 years.
By the Minister for the Environment, and certain commitments were given at the last election, and he's attending to that responsibility. Let's be frank, the campaign by some environmental groups is to actually close down the industry. They are on the record with respect to that objective. We as a nation have got a worsening situation with respect to our trade balance going to the importation of oil in Australia. We must continue exploration, but ensure that exploration and production is done in the most appropriate way from a health and safety and environmental point of view.
And also that those responsible are held responsible. You said you'll legislate the polluter pays principle. How will you do that, and what will it mean in practice? In particular, what will it mean in terms of this Montara spill?
Well, effectively, let's deal with the Montara incident. PTTEP Australasia is the Thai National Oil Company. To be fair to this company, from the first week of the accident, their company representatives from Thailand were actually in my office and the Minister for Infrastructure's office because of the Australian Maritime Safety Authority responsibilities. Absolutely accepted responsibility. The cost of this accident to date for that company is $319 million US. But we will be reflecting in legislation what has occurred with respect to this incident. And I must say, I suppose we were a little bit lucky that this company actually purchased the Australian operator 3 weeks before the incident, because this company was big enough to actually bear the technical and financial capacity to meet all the responsibilities of the accident. And it's going to raise more serious issues for me as the Minister, going to the capacity and whether or not companies have the technical and financial capacity to actually involve themselves in this industry.
And in the clean-up if something happens.
And in the clean-up, and we'll be strengthening the national response mechanisms. And I've got absolute support from industry and its peak council to cooperate on that front, and it will involve a strengthening of the regime from a government and a private sector point of view.
And Minister, what's the future of that company, PTTEP Australasia? Because I know you've got an independent review of the company and its operations in Australia. Will PTTEP be allowed to continue oil and gas operations in Australian waters?
Well, that'll be a matter for appropriate assessment by me following an independent report. I simply say that in terms of my legislative responsibilities, I must observe procedural fairness. I have sought to do that all the way through consideration of this report, and I will continue to do so. I will not seek to preempt possible outcomes with respect to that issue.
It's 16 to 8 on Breakfast. Our guest this morning is Resources Minister Martin Ferguson. Martin Ferguson, can I ask you about the mining tax now? The Treasurer, Wayne Swan, confirmed on Breakfast this week that we'll see the details of the new mining tax before the end of the year. Can we expect any changes to the headline rate of 30%?
There'll be no changes to the headline rate. The role of the Policy Transition Group is to make recommendations to the Treasurer as to the implementation of those principles. We've finished consultations. We're now in the process of making decisions which will go to the recommendations we present to the Treasurer prior to Christmas. But perhaps more importantly, this is only the first round of consultations with industry. We intend as a government to issue, I suppose, the draft legislation, the exposure draft in about May of next year. Between now and then we'll continue to consult industry as to the format of that draft bill. Once it's released, there'll be a further round of consultations and feedback, so we'll be going out of our way to actually get the legislation right.
Has there been any movement on that issue of state royalties and who pays it if the states keep jacking up their royalties?
This issue will be worked through one way or another, but I think industry understands that, yes, they want certainty, but they'll also appreciate that more and more the pressure is being put on the Commonwealth to pay for associated infrastructure for the development of the resources sector. And they appreciate that we can't have our revenue stream eaten away by states willy-nilly increasing state royalties.
The deal was done in the end by the Prime Minister and three of our largest miners, and in the end the new tax will only apply to coal and iron ore. Is that going to remain the situation? No new minerals will be taxed?
Yes, coal, iron ore and petroleum, the three growth areas in terms of commodity exports, and I might say very, very significant increases in commodity prices over the last 5 years. We've got a huge resource boom underway at the moment. The Australian community is entitled to a fair share of the benefits of that boom. We've got to invest in our future, infrastructure, reduce company taxation, try and increase savings through superannuation. This is what we've got to use the benefit of this boom for, to actually secure our future as a nation.
Martin Ferguson, thank you very much for joining us on Breakfast.
Thank you.
Martin Ferguson is the Federal Resources Minister, joining us in our Parliament House studio. It's 14 to 8.